This meeting is being recorded.
All right, it's official. This meeting is being recorded. Let me welcome everyone to our weekly webinar. I'm Diane McKeever, the chairman of the Education Committee for the Minnesota SCORE chapter. Today, we have a very interesting webinar plan, small company retirement plans. A lot of people think that they can't afford a retirement plan, but our presenter, Alan Gorlick, who is also a mentor for our chapter, is going to tell you how maybe you can afford it and that it can be a great perk to try and retain your employees. So we have a little bit of business that we have to discuss first. Alan, if you'll click. I just want to tell you a little bit about SCORE. SCORE is a nonprofit nationwide organization. There are over 300 chapters in the country with over 10,000 volunteers. We provide free, confidential business mentoring, both in person and online. And our chapter, the Minnesota chapter, which is made up of Manatee and Sarasota counties, we have nearly 90 volunteers standing by waiting to help you. And our chapter was recently recognized as a Diamond Chapter of Excellence and also a Chapter of the Year. Since its founding more than 50 years ago, SCORE has assisted over 11 million clients. So what part of the process can we help you with? Well, very often people will contact us because they have a germ of an idea and want to find out whether it's a viable idea. We can help you with that. We can point you in the right direction, and then you can make the decision whether you want to go forward, or you've actually opened a business and you need help, or you want to grow your business. You've been in business for a few years and stagnated and you want to boost it up a little bit. We can help you with that. And lastly, if you're selling or closing a business, we have a team that is dedicated to helping you do that. I would encourage you to go to our website, which is minnesota.score.org. That's where you can go to request a mentor. That's where you can also go to find other workshops, just a little pitch for what's coming up. Next week, we are having Minnesota County representative come and talk about resources for businesses. The week after that, I'm going to present on Excel analyzing data. And we also then have 3 Grow with Google webinars, all this in August. And those 3 Google webinars are in Spanish. So if you know of anyone who would benefit from that, please send them to our website, minnesota.score.org. All right, and on there, we also have templates. So you can do a search. There's a great search bar. You can look through the resources in our library. And lastly, I want to thank all of our sponsors and community partners. These banks, if you come in with a SCORE mentor to these banks, you're going to find that you're more welcome than if you walked in by yourself. So consider getting a SCORE mentor to help you if you're thinking about financing. So that's it. Let me turn this over to Alan Gorlick. He can give you a little background on himself and kick into this webinar. Thank you so much for doing this, Alan. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Diane. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I could spend the whole hour telling you how wonderful I am, but why don't we just leave it as the fact that I have a lot of experience with retirement plans. And what I'm like to do today is share some of that experience with you. We call this small company retirement plans because I think the need is greater for people in small companies to understand the opportunity. But you'll see a lot of what I say today could apply to any size company. Also, we're going to give you a lot of details, how many people or what size or how many dollars, things like that. You don't have to take copious notes because everyone who's signed on to the webinar will get a copy of the slides. So you won't have to memorize what the maximum amount you could put in your 401k if you're 57 years old, that kind of thing. It will all be shown to you. So since I said we're going to talk about things that people think that aren't true, I thought I'd start with some of the most common myths about 401ks. And of course, the first one is the one I hear most often. When I meet people who run small companies and I say, you have a retirement plan, they'll often say no because it's too expensive. And so we want to debunk that as quickly as possible, though, of course, too expensive is in the eyes of the beholder. But you're going to, when you really look at the numbers, you're going to find it's much less than you thought. And a lot of that comes back in the first year as a tax credit. So it may not actually cost you anything. People think it's too complicated, but we're going to talk about the kinds of support you can get. So it's not complicated at all. The third bullet is just plain wrong. It's a great plan. Of course you need it. You don't always require an employer match, but we're going to talk about cases where it makes sense to have a match, and then you can do the math and make a decision. Employees do take advantage, especially now that the law allows automatic enrollment. And you get a very high participation with automatic enrollment. And as far as difficult to choose and manage investments, you offload that onto experts. You don't do that. In fact, you shouldn't do it. So no matter what size company you are, you shouldn't be choosing the investments. You should leave that to the experts. So if you have a plan, it helps with recruiting. That's one of the first things people ask about is what are the benefits? And generally health is the first benefit they ask about. But right after that, they want to know if there's a retirement plan. Once they're in the plan, it does boost retention. If you use it for profit sharing, you can, instead of a fixed match, you can set it up for profit sharing. So now everybody's in this together. All of your employees are going to make more money when the company does better, and make less money, I guess, if the company doesn't do as well. And of course, as a business owner, you can contribute toward the plan, which helps you save for retirement and gets you some current year tax savings. And the last bullet, if you're a mature company and you already have people ready to retire, if they can retire on time because they've saved money, then they're not going to have as much healthcare needs that would fall on your company's plan. And insurance companies aren't stupid. They know if you've got a lot of older people, you're going to have more health needs, and they're going to charge you more for your health care. So for a mature company, this actually could be a benefit. I always like to quote Einstein. We find no matter what we're talking about, we can find a quote from Albert Einstein that fits it. And I love this one because compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. It's just amazing, as I'm going to show you on another slide, the difference of starting early and getting the benefit of compound interest. Here's just, let's assume you could get an average 7% return and you put in $200 a month. And we can redo this for any return assumption or any amount of money per month. 200 may be too much for some people when they're young. But the point is that it grows a lot more with a lot more time because of compounding. Compound interest is not a linear function. It's a parabolic function. And so the compounding effect is greater than just, if you're in for twice as long, you're going to make more than twice as much because it's not a linear formula. Now, there's a lot of versions of this, and I love this slide. I picked this particular version because it's so easy to see. But let's assume that we have twin sisters. We'll call them Betty and Veronica. Those of you who are old enough to remember the Jughead comic strip would recognize these names. But anyway, we assume that they agree when they're young that they're going to save for retirement. And what happens is Betty starts saving $1,000 a year, and Veronica doesn't, even though they agreed they were going to do it. And then at 10 years later, they compare notes, and Veronica says, "Oh my goodness, I promised to do it, and I never did. I'll start now." And Betty says, "Well, there's no point staying in this plan because my sister isn't even doing it," and she stops. And so then you go out another 26 years. Now, Betty has put $10,000 into the plan. Veronica has put $26,000 into the plan. And you can see that Betty has about 50% more money, even though she stopped after 10 years. Now, this is assuming the 9%. You can do this with, any assumption you want. If you take it out to age 65 and you assume 6.25%, they end up with the same amount of money. But there's really no special thing you can do late in life that beats starting to save early in life. So even if you only put in $50 a month or $10 a paycheck or whatever you can afford, you're going to do so much better if you start younger and you don't have to take a lot of risk. I mean, if you want to start saving at 55 to retire at 62, not only do you have to put a lot of money in, you're going to have to take a lot of risk in order to get that growth. And so this is a great example. And, those of you who are on this call who are participants, I hope this gets you fired up to sign up for the plan. But, for those of you who run companies and are thinking about offering it, you can see how offering this to your young employees is a fantastic benefit for them. And if they don't know that, you can show them this slide or one like it. There's, we can tweak the math to make any reasonable assumptions for those people. Another thing that a lot of people think they can do is time the market. And you can. I mean, it's not impossible. Some people do time the market, but most people can't because the market is not that predictable. It's kind of flighty. And so what we're saying here is these are real numbers. If you put in $10,000 between January 2002 and January 2022, so a flat period of 20 years, and you just left it there the whole time, you would make 9.4% per year. That's not total, that's per year. If you miss the 10 best days, only 10 best days, you cut your earnings almost in half. If you miss 20 days, you cut it by 3/4. If you miss the 30 best days, you really made no money at all. And some people say, well, all right, if you're so smart, what if I miss the worst days? But the problem is the best days and the worst days tend to occur very close to each other. And so you really can't time it for either one. And the reason we show this slide, not just in today's presentation, but this is something we would show if we were enrolling a group into a 401k, because we want the participants to understand that to get the benefit, they have to get in and they have to stay in. Like they say with the lottery, you have to be in it to win it. And it's, if you're that good that you can pick the best days, well, then more power to you. But I don't know anyone who's been able to do that. So think about it this way: get in the plan and stay in the plan. Now, a lot of states have mandatory plans that are sponsored by the states. I sort of shudder at the thought of a bunch of bureaucrats telling my employees what to invest in. But 14 states and 2 cities, that's as of only like 2 weeks ago, I think is the last I checked this number. So it's probably current. They have these programs. Some are optional, some are mandatory. 10 states are mandatory, which means that if you have a certain number of employees, you have to offer this plan. And the employee has to opt out if the employee doesn't want to be in the plan, which isn't that hard, but people tend not to opt out. Now, as of now, Florida does not have a plan, and I haven't read anything to suggest that Florida might, but you never know. States tend to copy each other on things like insurance and retirement plans, and because it's hard to invent new things, it's easier to just get together with another state and copy what they have. So be aware, this may be coming to Florida, but even if it does, I would highly recommend you have a plan that you can manage, because as I said, I'm just not sure I want to trust the state to do a good job. So the first one is the SEP. You've probably all heard of SEPs. You may even have one already. It's great if you're self-employed, right? But it also works if you have employees. It's just you run into some disadvantages if you have employees. But for self-employed or employees, it's like the word says, it's simplified. But the thing is, it's employer-only contributions. The employees do not contribute. The employer puts the money in. It can only be a traditional. You can't do a Roth option. You can see what the limits are. They're very high. I mean, you could put $61,000 into this plan. And if you are self-employed, that's a lot. But what I find is the really best benefit of a SEP is that you don't have to figure it out until you figure out your taxes. With every other kind of plan, you have to put the money in either by the end of the calendar year or before April 15th. Some are calendar year, and anything's calendar year would also be fiscal year if your fiscal year is not a calendar year, or sometimes by the normal filing date of April 15th. But with a SEP, you wait until you figure out your taxes. And if you delay filing your taxes until November, which is perfectly legal and very common, or maybe it's October, I don't remember now. I think I said the wrong day. I think it's October, but whatever. You don't have to figure out the SEP until you figure out your taxes. And I kind of do it interactively. So you figure out your taxes and you say, all right, computer, now I'm going to put X amount into my SEP. What does that do to my taxes? And it tells you. And then you can say, all right, I'll put a little more, I'll put a little less. The only thing is you can't go over 25% of compensation and you can't go over 61,000, but those are very high numbers. And for most people, that's quite enough. So it really is fantastic for individuals who are self-employed and do not have any employees. You start to see some things that are wrong with it, though, if you do have employees. And the first bullet is the one that I've seen so many companies come up against and didn't realize it, that everybody gets the same percentage. And it's not that employers are greedy and want to give themselves more. I've had cases where employers want to give themselves less. Said, well, I've got the business. I don't need to give myself a SEP contribution, but they have to. Everyone has to get the same percentage. There is no option on this. Everyone's 100% invested, 100% vested, not invested. So that means that you give people the money and they leave next year and they take it. There is no vesting plan that you can put in. Now, again, if it's just you, well, that's great. You don't mind being 100% vested. But if you're trying to set something up for employees and you want employee retention is one of the reasons you want to do it, this may or may not contribute to employee retention. There's no Roth option. It's all traditional. No catch-up contributions. That refers to most of the other retirement plans allow people over 50 to put in more per year than people who are less than 50. They call that a catch-up contribution. You can't borrow from it. And I'm going to tell you later why you shouldn't borrow from any of these, but you can't borrow from it. And the employees can't add to it themselves. They would have to set up their own individual IRA if they wanted to save more, but then they wouldn't get some of the tax benefits. So it's great because it's easy. It's great because it has high numbers. It's great because you can wait till you file. But if you have employees, you start to see some of the disadvantages. So the next one up is called the simple. I think the SEP is actually simpler than the simple, but I didn't name these plans, so we have to live with them. You can see there's a lot of rules for this one. As I mentioned, you're going to get the slides, so you don't have to take a picture of this or try to memorize these rules. But if you have fewer than 100 employees and they are all earning at least $5,000 a year, which is not that much, you can set this up. And as we say, it is very simple. I put in the early withdrawal penalty because it's a little different. All these retirement plans, if they aren't a Roth plan, have a 10% early withdrawal penalty if you're under 59 and a half. However, with the simple, for the first 2 years of participation, the withdrawal penalty is 25%. So, depending on how you look at it, you might consider that an advantage. You might say, well, that's great. Now I know I got retention. Nobody's going to dare taking that money out the first 2 years. On the other hand, if they need the money, you've really hit them because they're going to pay tax on it, plus that 25% penalty. So it's something to think about. It's not a no-brainer, but it may fit exactly into what you need. And as the words say, it's not hard to set up. And here are the contribution limits, 14,000 from participants or 17,000 if they're over 50. The matching those is kind of tricky. You can match up to 3% of everyone's contribution, or you can give everyone 2% whether they contribute or not. So figure you're going to pay at least the 2% of everyone's pay into the simple. So it's not a cheap thing. But the idea is that, you're all in this together, and you do have a plan that you don't have a lot of ERISA controls around to keep your employees in the plan. So the next one up, and a lot of the people that have never heard of this, is the individual 401k, or what some people call the solo K or the individual K. You have a lot of branding around this. In fact, just as an aside, if you're wondering where the name 401k came from, understand that the US government doesn't hold focus groups to figure out great names for things. 401k is actually the paragraph number in the tax code that sets up this kind of plan. So if you're saving, say, for college savings, it's called a 529 plan because it's paragraph 529. And there's 403B and 357. Again, these are all tied to paragraphs in the tax code, no focus groups. So the individual K gives you a lot of the bells and whistles of a real 401k. It doesn't matter how you're set up. You can be a sole proprietorship, a corporation, an LLC, but you can only be one person or that person and a spouse, no other employees. But then you have kind of, you can sort of get into the bells and whistles of a 401k, but these bells and whistles come with a price. And the price is you have all the ERISA rules, you have to pay the fees of a 401k. It's, and depending on the year, some years you can put more in this than you can in a SEP. Some years you can put less in. I mean, this 61,000 is the same as a SEP if you're under 50. But you can go to 67,500 if you're over 50, which is a little better than a SEP. If you're making $500,000 a year and you want to save a lot of it, none of these plans are right for you. We need to look at something a little more esoteric. But for most people, they're going to fit into either the individual K, the SEP, or the regular 401k. And you can do with profit sharing. So one of the complications in this is if you're a sole proprietor, you have to decide which of your earnings you're considering earnings of the company and which of your earnings you're considering as your personal salary, because you have to apply a different formula to each one. So you really need a CPA to help you through this. But it has value. And I've pitched this a lot to people who are part of a company, but really on their own, like realtors, who may be having a good year and would like the benefits of a 401k, but the real estate broker, the big company, the Coldwell Banker or whoever it is, isn't offering a retirement plan. So this is a great thing for people like that. But then we get to the regular 401k, and most of what we're going to talk about today is the regular 401k. Employer contributions are optional. You can set up profit sharing. You can have loans, hardship withdrawals. You can set up a Roth version, which I highly recommend you do. You can allow for rollovers, which means people can take money from a previous 401k with a previous employer and roll it into the current one. Contributions, if it's not a Roth contribution, may reduce taxable income. The employer gets some tax credits, especially during the first year. You can set up your own rules for eligibility, within limits. Obviously, you can't just say only for people more than 6 feet tall or something like that, but you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the eligibility rules. You can tie it to other employee benefits. You really can set up, as long as you stay within the law, you can have a pretty customized plan. And that's really why for most companies, if you have more than a few employees and you want more benefits than a SEP, you really should go to the 401k. Now, one version of the 401k is the safe harbor 401k. And the deal with the safe harbor is there's no testing. So if you're not familiar with this, you may be wondering, well, what kind of testing? Like my students like to say, nobody told us there was going to be a quiz. It's not that kind of test. But there's two tests for a regular 401k. One is a participation test. They have fancier names, but one is a participation test, which says if the rank and file are not participating enough, the senior members of the company can't participate. And so even if you were putting money in through the year, you would have it would come back to you at the end of the year because you're not allowed. And the other test, which is actually more punitive, is the top heavy test. So maybe everyone's participating and you're passing that test, but the senior people are putting in so much that they're controlling too high a percentage of the total pool of investment. And then there's big penalties on that too. And so for a lot of companies, especially companies with lower paid employees who may or may not be participating, but maybe the top people are making really great salaries and the bottom people are perhaps just working for minimum wage, you're going to fail the tests. And you really need to look at a safe harbor because it has no testing. But the disadvantage is that you're required to do a match and the employees get immediate vesting. So obviously this is more popular with employees because they like the match, they like the vesting. So you have to do the math. It's not hard math. You have to do the math. You have to say, okay, now I have to do matching, whereas before I didn't have to. Remember, matching by definition means you only match the people who participate. So if you had low participation and that's what you're worried about, your matching costs aren't going to be that high anyway. But then you as a senior manager or an owner are going to get the tax benefits that you couldn't get if you weren't allowed to participate. Also, when you're doing the math, say, okay, now I have to do some matching, but how does that compare to other things I might spend money on in order to retain employees? And it might be that, this is a bargain when you do the math of other kinds of things you might have to do, like dental plans or eye plans or car plans or free bus tickets or whatever else you may have to do. This may turn out not only to be more effective, but might even turn out to be less costly. Now, selecting a provider, this is where the art form comes in. And you see a lot of, or at least I see, I don't know what you see, but I see a lot of this done wrong. So now we said at the beginning, it's not going to cost as much as you might fear, but how do you keep the cost down? Well, you want to use a provider who offers discounts for small company and startup plans. Unfortunately, there are a lot of providers who do that. I don't want to list them all because at SCORE we tend not to want to favor one provider over another. But there are many that offer. So you want to know that they offer the discounts and that they specialize in small company and startup plans. So the first bullet by itself is not enough. Because if they say, well, yeah, we'll give you a discount, but then you never can get anyone to pay attention to you. You're always calling into a call center. They don't know who you are. They don't have any kind of understanding of what it's like to get a startup plan going. Well, then the fees you save they're not good savings. So you need both the first and second bullet for the first one to be worthwhile. You also need flexible fee allocation, which means that some of the fees can be put on the employer, some can be put on the employees, and generally with startup plans, you put it all on the employees. They'll understand that. You explain that they're going to pay a little higher fee than maybe they pay if they work for General Motors, but they're going to get a plan that's as good as the General Motors plan, and maybe that's worth it to them because we talk fees, we're talking fractions of a percent. So you may hear high numbers, but it's fractions of a percent. It's if someone has the opportunity to earn 7 or 8% on their money tax deferred, they're really not that sensitive to whether it was really 7 or if it was 6 3/4. So you want that flexibility, and you do want to pay attention to the share class. If you invest in mutual funds now, there's A shares and C shares and iShares, and the fees vary depending on the share class. One of the things with small company plans is you want to be sure you're getting the lowest cost share class that's consistent with your fee allocation. So one of the ways to allocate the fees to the employees is to use a share class that's a little more expensive in order to allocate the fees without them having to pay an explicit fee. So it's a bit of a trade-off. It requires a little bit of explaining. You don't want the employees later to say, wait a minute, why am I getting an R3 share when I should have gotten an R2, or maybe vice versa. But you want to explain to people that you've done it this way, so they're not paying explicit fees. They might be paying 0.1% more for that share class, but now they've got a full-fledged 401k and with all the benefits that they wanted. When you look at sub-accounts, which is what the investments within a 401k, they kind of look like mutual funds, but the fee structures are different from mutual funds, even if they have the same name. And so we call them sub-accounts. And what you want to check when you're selecting a provider is, are they looking for best-in-class sub-accounts, or are they just wanting to use their own? And there's more than one question you have to ask, because it may look like it's their own, but in each case, they have a sub-advisor. So you're dealing with XYZ insurance company, and they have the XYZ income plan. So it looks like it's proprietary, but then you see it's sub-advised by, let's say, JP Morgan or American Funds, or someone who's capable of managing an income fund. That's not really a proprietary fund. And when they do it like that, they can monitor it and they can change it. So like maybe they have the proprietary XYZ income fund and it's managed by JP Morgan, and then they realize that JP Morgan is not doing such a great job and they want to switch to Janus Henderson. Well, they can do that if they set it up so they can do it. And so again, it's not a proprietary fund. It really is a best in class, but you need to ask a few questions and look under the hood to make sure that you're not just getting all these mutual funds that are only offered by the record keeper or the insurance company. You want diversification across style boxes, which means large cap, small cap, mid cap, growth, value. You want various themes like electronic vehicles or gold, things like that. You want them to offer index funds. The irony in this is that you'll find that most of your employees ignore all of this stuff. They find it's not necessary or it's too complicated. And they end up, you'll see that most of them will be whatever the default fund is. Or if you're offering funds that are based on the year they're going to retire, like there's the 2040 plan and the 2050 plan. And maybe they'll just go into one of those, and that's fine. You've offered something that's good, it'll be managed well. But to make sure that you don't get criticized later and that you can handle the employee who really does understand these various things like style boxes and themes, you want to be sure that your plan offers them. And you don't have to offer 50 different sub-accounts. You can, but you don't have to. You offer a dozen sub-accounts, you'll probably cover most of what you need, or maybe even all of what you need. And then you're not driving your employees crazy with choice overload. You're giving them enough that they can study and make a good decision. Now, since you're a small company or perhaps even a startup plan, you want to make sure you get the support. Ask up front what support is offered. And again, this comes back to that second bullet of hiring a record keeper. That's what we call the companies that offer retirement 401ks. We call them record keepers. Usually they're insurance companies, but sometimes they're mutual fund companies. But make sure the record keeper has specified support for startup plans. They can help people sign up. They're available for follow-up, so that they're really holding your hand for at least the first several weeks until you're up and running. You also want them to take a lot of the fiduciary responsibilities away from you. We could do a whole seminar, and I have, on what it means to be a fiduciary and what the risks are. But the point is, you don't want to be picking funds for your plan. You don't want to be putting portfolios together for your employees. You don't want to do any of those things. You want the ability to offload. Now, you'll still be a fiduciary. I mean, you just can't say, I'm not a fiduciary, leave me alone. But the more you offload on a professional, the less exposed you are to doing the wrong thing or being sued later for doing the wrong thing. So you want the fiduciary offloading, and most of the record keepers offer that. Sometimes not on their own, but through a third party. Sometimes there's a fee associated with it, but it's worth it. You'll be able to sleep at night, and for good reason. And of course, you want a website. We have another slide talking about websites, but you certainly want one. The record keeper should offer a Roth option. They should offer automatic enrollment. And we have a big word here, the qualified default investment alternatives. The automatic enrollment is fairly new. It's only been around a few years. And I tell you, the truth is that when I first heard of automatic enrollment, I said, oh man, that's going to be a giant grievance. People don't want to be automatically enrolled in anything. They want the ability to decide whether to be enrolled or not. And even though the automatic enrollment allows them to opt out, they're going to hate it. Well, I'm happy to say I was wrong. Every study that I've read and every person I've talked to loves automatic enrollment. Even though enrolling online by themselves as an employee is, maybe a 15 to 30-minute job. It's not complicated. It's all on their own workstation. They just don't do it. They keep putting it off. And then a year or two goes by and they're not saving for retirement. So the automatic enrollment is actually very popular. And so you should make sure that your provider offers that. The employee should be able to access the website. They should be able to access anything that you can access so that they can see what's going on with their investments. They can get more information about the types of investments and be able to do some planning as to how much they need to put in based on how much they need when they retire. It should offer loans, although I'm still promising. I'm going to tell you why you don't want a lot of people doing it, but you really do need to offer it because there are cases where people have to borrow the money. And then you find out if they offer hardship or non-hardship withdrawals. Generally, the hardship withdrawals are pretty common. The non-hardship are less common. You kind of have to decide if you want to allow that. It's obviously employees like the ability to take the money out, but maybe you shouldn't let them because they're going to pay these big 10% penalty plus the taxes, and they may not realize it until it's too late. So you probably just want to limit yourself to hardship withdrawals, but that's a decision each company can make in consultation with the record keeper. Now, the website you want should be the same as the big plan's website. So if you're looking at the website, it should look just like what the employees at GM see when they look at their website. Usually they have questionnaires to help people decide, what my risk appetite is, how much do I want to be in one, do I want to be domestic or international? Do I want to be fixed income or equities? I find that most of these questionnaires are impossible for the employees to understand. So, see if you can get understandable questionnaires that ask reasonable questions, not things that people can't understand and ignore, because then the questionnaire doesn't do them any good. It should offer all kinds of self-help. So if they really want to dig in and do some math, they can do it. If they want to look at the Morningstar rating or something like that for the individual sub-accounts, it should all be there. There should be portfolio tools so that they say, all right, if I put these 5 sub-accounts together in this particular proportion, how much risk am I taking? How would I have done over the last 10 years if I had these 5? And it should be education unlimited. They should be able to learn anything they want to learn about investing, about saving, about Social Security. I mean, and again, most of the websites have this. These are not stretch goals. These are very routine things, but you want to ask and make sure that they're available. When you talk to employees, this is a a very recent survey. I think it probably is more around young people, but this is an order of preference. People, if you want to talk to them, they want to email. Notice phone call isn't on the list at all. Email is the preferred, or else a digital newsletter. They like the communication to be individually targeted, so it means it has to kind of look at what they have. They do like one-on-one meetings. So if you're using a record keeper who has people who will come on site and do one-on-one meetings, that is favored, and I think it's a great thing. And most of these plans have mobile apps, and so that people can look at their 401k on their phone. They don't have to come to work and get on the workstation. Now this is, I put an exclamation point on this one because this is very important. If you're setting up a plan or you have a plan, you say, all right, now who am I going to use? Who's going to be the record keeper for me? Well, I'll go back to that previous slide where I told 2 slides where I told you all the things to look for. But don't do this. Don't say, well, I'm going to benchmark all these choices based on how their sub-accounts have done. Because of too obvious, these things are obvious and yet people don't think about it. First of all, past performance doesn't guarantee similar results. So the fact that the sub-accounts did well last year, everybody did well last year. Most people did poorly this year. So it doesn't guarantee anything. But more importantly, because you're looking at a 401k and maybe you're going to put in a dozen or 25 sub-accounts, the results are how the portfolios are set up. So if you're only benchmarking the 6 best funds, well, that doesn't make any sense because you have the benefit of hindsight as to which are the 6. Doesn't mean the employees were in those 6. And as I said, most employees go into the default anyway. So it's just, you have something to measure, but it's absolutely useless to pick a provider based on sub-account performance. Now you can pick a provider based on their ability to give you information about their sub-accounts, such as the Morningstar rating. So maybe they have their own secret sauce on how they rate sub-accounts. That's good, but the actual performance of the sub-accounts is not a good way to pick a record keeper. The second bullet is probably even more important. Never, ever, ever advise employees about the investments. The liability is unbelievable because now you're the full-fledged fiduciary. You told these 5 employees that they should invest in swampland in the Everglades, and guess what? It's full of snakes and alligators, and they're going to sue you. So just avoid it. Just direct them to the website, or if your plan has an advisor, the kind of work I've done, direct them to the advisor. Do not tell them what investments to be in. And you're probably not an expert anyway, so don't pretend you're one and don't play one on television. And don't offer crypto. And I put this next slide in, I put it in right at the last minute because I was hesitant about even going down the road of talking about crypto because I know a lot of people have made money on crypto, on blockchain, various things like Bitcoin or Ethereum. But you know, right now they've lost about half their value. Some have lost more than half their value. But you still might say, well, you know, all right, it's down half. This is the perfect time to invest. Well, if you feel that way, fine. Go ahead, buy as much Bitcoin as you want for yourself. Do not put it in your 401k. And here's why. That puts you as a fiduciary again. So when it loses half again, or even goes to 0, which it could, you will be sued. Just accept it. They're going to sue you. They're going to say, you put it in the plan. We didn't realize it was risky. But then the Department of Labor is going to come after you. And I got this right off the Department of Labor website. The first bullet is everything that I agree with. This is all stuff wrong with Bitcoin. Now here's the Department of Labor saying it, not Alan Gorlick saying it. They say that plan participants can't understand it. Now, you know, government always believes that we're stupid and we don't understand anything. But that's where they're coming from. And so if somebody comes by later and says, you know, I didn't understand it, man, it's going to be right in their wheelhouse. Also, it's hard to track their value. even if you track it, there's really some concern about how accurate it is. But look at the last bullet. The Department of Labor said there's an evolving regulatory environment. Well, I use their words, but if you translate that to common English, what they're saying is, you put crypto in the plan, we're coming after you. And I don't think you want the Department of Labor on your neck. So even if you love crypto, you love Bitcoin, do it yourself, keep it out of your 401k. Okay, now some advice for participants. Whether you're in a plan now or you're hoping that you'll have a plan, here's just basic advice, nothing you couldn't think of on your own, but follow the guidance of pay yourself first, right? If the money comes out of your pay and you never see it, you'll never miss it. And years later, you'll be amazed how much you've saved up. Sign up if you have to, or if you're in a plan that allows automatic enrollment, don't opt out, let it happen. Generally, the plans that have automatic enrollment also have automatic increases. So every few years, your amount you put in will go up automatically. And you should do that too, because again, you won't feel it and you'll just love how much you've saved. And if you're trying to figure it out, maybe you're on a tight budget, you're in your 30s, you got 3 kids, and it's hard to save for retirement under those conditions. At least contribute the amount that's going to be matched, because that's like 100% return that year. Where else can you invest that's going to give you 100% return guaranteed? So at least put in the money that's going to be matched. Do more if you can, but at least put in the money that's going to be matched. You want to educate yourself? The website offered by the 401k provider, the record keeper, is going to have education, as we talked about in an earlier slide. You want to follow your investments. Don't fire and forget. Now, I'm not saying you want to follow them every hour or even every week. And you certainly don't want to trade them every day. In fact, most of the plans won't let you trade them every day. But follow them. Don't look a year later and say, man, what was I thinking? Why was I in that? When obviously it wasn't a good idea. So follow your investments, be a smart investor, and choose the Roth if it makes sense for you. I think if you're under 40, it absolutely makes sense, because you're not going to get the tax break and the money coming in, but it's all going to come out tax-free. So let's say you're 35, you're going to save another 30 years before you retire. So you gave up those tax breaks going in, but if compound interest continues to be the 8th wonder of the world, you're gonna have so much more money later, and you're going to be in a much higher tax bracket later. You want that money to come out tax-free. Now, one of the objections I often hear to choosing the Roth is people say, well, I really need that tax break now. I really need that to get that tax break. And what I say is, are you sure? Do the math. Because for a lot of people, the standard deduction is so high. Remember, it was doubled under the tax plan that was passed a couple of years ago. It's known as the Trump tax plan. They doubled the standard deduction. So you may find that the standard deduction is covering the bulk of your income anyway. So that extra tax break you think you're getting on putting money into the traditional 401k is unnecessary. You'd have covered it anyway with your standard deduction. Choose the Roth, get that tax-free growth. It's a much better idea if you're under 40. It might be a good idea later, but I picked 40 because every time I've done the math, it's a no-brainer if you're under 40. And now, if the plan offers the Roth and the traditional 401k, they will offer the same investments, the same fees. If it's not a safe harbor plan, the same testing. If it's a safe harbor plan, then, as we mentioned, there is no testing. They both offer tax deferral. It's just a question of, will you pay the tax later? And you can mix in any proportion. So you can say, I want half in the Roth and half in the traditional, or 60-40 or 20-80 or whatever. So do the math, figure out, where it's best for you. And you can change the proportion anytime. You just can't recharacterize money that's already in one or the other. So the Roth is after tax, tax-free in retirement. Now, if you're making a lot of money, you can't have a Roth IRA, but you can always have a Roth 401k. No matter how much money you make, you can have a Roth 401k. There's no income test. And those of you who've heard of the RMD, the required minimum distribution, that's money when you're 72, you have to start taking an RMD out of your retirement account. You don't have to take RMDs out of a Roth IRA, and you don't have to take RMDs out of a Roth 401k as long as you convert it to a Roth IRA at retirement. So this is, for a lot of people, it doesn't matter. You're going to live off your retirement savings. The RMD is not a big deal. You probably take more than that out any year anyway. But for people who are highly compensated or who've saved a lot, or maybe when they retire, they sell their house for $2 million and they can live off of that just fine. They hate that RMD because they have to take the money out and pay tax on it. If you're in the Roth side of it, you don't have to do the RMD. You don't have that tax. You can leave all your money to your kids or your favorite charity. So there's a lot to think about, but don't just walk away from the Roth and say, well, I need that tax deduction, because it may not be worth it and you might not need it at all. And here's some warnings for participants. Don't do these. I didn't put an exclamation point on this one, but they're just as important. Don't ask the person in the next cubicle what to invest in, because that person has different needs, maybe a different age, different responsibilities, different attitudes toward risk. You can discuss the investments. I didn't understand what this, car companies in New Zealand actually invested in. I didn't know there were car companies in New Zealand. You can have discussions like that, but make your own decision or ask an expert or something. Don't base it on the person in the next cubicle. You're different, and that person's probably not an expert anyway. Don't leave money in an old 401k. Roll it to your current plan or roll it to an IRA. I find so many cases where people have left money in an old 401k and they've forgotten about it, or the company that they worked for goes out of business. Now the 401k is with a trustee, so they're going out of business doesn't eliminate your money. But the problem is you go to this trustee and you can even remember who it is. And you say, I just realized I left XYZ company 15 years ago and I want my IRA. And they say, all right, get someone from HR to tell us you're not working there anymore. And you say, I can't get anyone from HR. The company doesn't exist. And next thing, you've got a lawyer writing letters. So you don't want to forget about it. You don't want to get stuck where you can't reach it. You don't want them to turf you out because they don't want to pay those fees. And all of a sudden you're in a taxable event. Just roll it into your current plan. Or if your current plan doesn't allow rolling it, then open an IRA. It's easy to do. And at least your money will be front and center. And when you do it, make sure it's a direct transfer from one trustee to another. So don't touch the money. Many times they'll write the check to the new trustee, but they'll send it to you. So it'll be to Chase Bank for the benefit of Joe Smith, right? Well, if you're Joe Smith, you get that check, just march over to Chase Bank with it. Do not endorse it. Do not do anything with it. You want it to be a direct transfer. Otherwise, you have 60 days to roll it over, or you're going to pay tax on it. And those 60 days are non-negotiable. It's not 61, and you just might screw it up. So get it as direct transfer. Now, the last bullet, as mentioned, I've been threatening to talk about this, and so I'm going to talk about it. I've seen so many people recommend borrow from your 401k. Don't get money some other way, because you're only borrowing from yourself. It's a great idea. You're paying interest to yourself. Well, I'm going to do a little math for you now to understand why. I could do a whole presentation on why you shouldn't do this, but let's just do some quick math. If you want to put $1,000 into your 401k, and it's a traditional 401k, you have to earn $1,000 and you just put it in, case closed. But let's say you borrow that $1,000 and now you need to repay it. Well, you're going to repay it with after-tax money. You're not going to get a tax break for repaying it. So if you're in the 20% tax bracket, you have to earn $1,250 to be left with $1,000 to put back in. So that extra $250 against the $1,000 you took out is like paying 25% interest. 25% interest. Anybody tried to charge you 25% interest, you could bring them up on usury charges. But you're going to do that to yourself if you borrow from your 401k and then try to pay it back with after-tax money. That's if you're in the 20% tax bracket. It's worse if you're in the 30% bracket. You can do that math. There's a lot of other reasons why you shouldn't do it. And if it's your last resort, if it really is, well, then do it and bite the bullet on paying it back. But I think people don't do this math. They don't understand what they're getting into when it seems like such low-hanging fruit to borrow money from. Now, there are other types of plans. We're not going to talk about them, but be aware they exist. It's cash balance plans. The non-qualified deferred comp, it looks like a 401k. In other words, if it's set up for highly compensated people within your company, it's going to look like the 401k. It's going to look like the same investments, but it's not. It's not a 401k. It has lots of different benefits and lots of different risks, but it is something for people who make a lot of money, max out their 401k, and are looking for something else. It's got its own set of rules. It would be an hour conversation by itself. There are also plans that are based on life insurance, and some of these are very good, especially for small companies, where maybe you have 3 or 4 senior people and no junior people, or very few junior people. And maybe one of these people couldn't get life insurance because of health issues. You can do a retirement plan based on life insurance that gets around that and provides a lot of money for retirement. Of course, there are annuities. There's a zillion kinds of annuities. That's even more than one presentation if we wanted to go into that. But they are another good way to save for retirement. And then we've got the 403B and the 457. If you're a government agency or a not-for-profit, you'll probably have one of those. They look and feel very much like 401ks, but they're just covered by different paragraphs in the tax code. Now, I said I wasn't going to recommend a lot of companies because we don't do that, but I have to give a shout out to my friends at Mutual of Omaha. They provided a lot of the facts that I'm sharing with you today, and they even allowed me to plagiarize some parts of some of their slides. So they get a big shout out and a big thank you from me. And of course, they are in this business and they do specialize in small companies. So we have some time, and actually as much time as you want. Do we have any questions, Diane?
Yeah, we do have one question. Angela said, if the employees, in quotation, are all 1099s, are they considered the same as W-2 employees, or would they need to sign up their own and cannot offer an employee plan?
Yeah, for 1099 employees, they should set up their own SEPs. There may be a way for the company to offer something, but I've never seen it. So either the answer is no, or I'm just ignorant of it. But generally 1099 employees set up their own SEPs, and that's the best way for them to go, because then the money is considered employer money and they can contribute up to the $61,000.
And then, of course, with 1099s, doesn't it get a little dicey? You know, if you were to able to do that, then they really are employees, and are they 1099s?
Yeah, there is that issue. Florida's not as bad as California, but a lot of the states are really jumping on people being called 1099s when the state wants them to be considered as W-2 employees. Again, Florida, I haven't heard too much, but that stuff's coming because the states realize they can, do more nanny state stuff, and they can extract more taxes because the W-2 employee doesn't get as many write-offs as a 1099 employee.
If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, though I do see that Sid just wrote, if you are a W-2, but the company is not allowing 401s, how do you go about investing in a 401?
Okay, well, if the company doesn't have one, you can't have one as a W-2. You would have to set up your own IRA. But since the company doesn't offer a retirement plan, you have the opportunity for a tax-deductible contribution to your IRA. unless you make more money than a certain amount. I don't know what the amounts are, but they're pretty high numbers. So if you're an employee working for a company that does not offer a retirement plan, chances are very good that you can set up your own IRA and put money in pre-tax as if it were a 401k.
This is pretty confusing stuff. Alan, you've done a really great job at it. But if you are a SCORE Minnesota client and you would like Alan to help you with this, he can be brought in as a co-mentor with your primary mentor and help unravel the mysteries of all of this. Sid had a follow-up question about investing in his 401. If you are over a certain income, is it only allowed if you're over a certain income? That's a little unclear.
No, anyone who works for the company can invest in the 401k. What he may be getting to is the testing. So if you're a highly compensated employee in that company and the company fails the test and doesn't have a safe harbor plan, you won't be able to invest. But there's no other rule that says based on how much you make, you can or cannot invest.
All right. The difference between a SEP and an individual 401.
Okay, so it depends on the year. Some years the individual 401 has a lot more bells and whistles. Some years it has a lot more that you can invest. Right now they're very similar. They both have the $61,000 limit, although the individual K allows you to go up to 67 if you're over 50. And the individual 401k, can have the loans and some of the other features. But SEPs are so good that I would say do a SEP unless you have a good reason not to.
All right, Vinny, I hope that answered your question. Unless somebody has any more questions. Sid is back. If you are W-2, but being paid hourly, hence not able to contribute to 401?
I don't know why you couldn't contribute if you're paid hourly. That's
Right.
something to think of with your HR department.
Mm-hmm. Can you do a Roth in a SEP, or is that only in a solo K?
Yeah, you can't do a Roth in a SEP. That's one of the disadvantages of a SEP, that you can't do a Roth. I don't know why. I mean, I think it's just an oversight. I mean, there's no reason not to allow that, because the government would make more in taxes in the current year, which is when they seem to be wanting to make more taxes.
Don't point that out to them, Ellen. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't think there's any senators on this call.
Yeah, good. Okay, Brendan Brendan, is there any reason to ever not have a safe harbor, but just a regular 401k?
Yes, the reason is the safe harbor has required matching. And so a lot of companies don't want the required matching. They don't want to spend that money. In fact, it's a very common issue. Generally, I recommend everyone do the safe harbor plan so that the senior people can be in the plan, because what they get benefit and tax benefits more than covers the cost of the matching, which, by the way, is also a write-off to them. But that's the reason I hear. I don't want to do a safe harbor because I don't want to match. But sometimes they don't want to do a safe harbor because they want a vesting schedule. They want to say you have to work here for 5 years. We'll do a match, but we want you to work here for 5 years to vest that match. I see less of that, but that would be a good reason not to do a safe harbor.
Good. Okay. That I think is our last question, and we're at 1 o'clock. So good job, Alan, as usual. Alan has presented to us many times, and he always does an amazing job. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise. We encourage you to go to minnesota.score.org and look through the resources there. You will be getting a copy of this video and the Alan slides. You'll be able to play with the numbers on them. So thank you all for coming. And again, thank you, Alan, for participating.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye-bye,
Don't forget, you'll get a survey.
Yes, you will get a survey, so please fill it out. And tell us what other topics interest you. That's important too. Thank you all. Bye-bye.